Patoot. Hello, my sweet, precious friends. If you're a fan of mine, there is at least a teeny, tiny chance that at some point you have watched at least one review of mine. Reviews are a ton of work compared to regular videos, but I absolutely love doing them. Especially now that I have Kane to do them for me. There he is, working on the Origami King review now. Keep up the good work, buddy. Breath of the Wild review hit 4 million views. All thanks to you. It's all worth it, I promise. My review format has remained unchanged pretty much since the beginning. You can see it way back in my very first review, which was for Super Mario 3D. 4 minutes and 50 seconds? For a mainline Mario game? Oh boy. It's good. Well, anyway, I want to talk a little about my reviews and explain how they're about to change. But first, while we're on the subject, I figure I should answer a very common question. What is it with the 7-point scoring system? Well, after 5 years, I am finally here to explain it to you. I have always believed that scoring systems, for the most part, are very flawed in this industry. One major problem that much smarter people than me have talked about is the idea that reviewers are too scared to properly use their whole scales because people have, for whatever reason, come to believe that anything lower than a 7 on a 10-point scale is a bad game. I mean, a 5 is seen as absolute trash. But that doesn't make much sense to me. That's only halfway up the scale. To me, that means that a game has a lot of bad elements, but it might have a lot of good elements as well. And if one person feels a game has 5 points of bad and 5 points of good, another person might not mind some of that bad stuff and might think that the good stuff is even better than the first person did. So to them, it might end up being a really terrific game. That's how it should work. But realistically, a score of 5 is basically a death sentence. We've come to understand that a 5 means don't even bother. Even 7s are seen as mediocre scores in most cases, especially for high-profile games. And that also makes very little sense. That's pretty far up the scale. That's still a good game, just with some issues. Or maybe gameplay that's fun, but just not as fun as possible. But nope, when it comes to mainstream games and review outlets, public perception is very skewed. IMHO. Another big problem I have with most scoring systems is that people just do not need that many points. I already feel like 10 points to choose from should be plenty. Then doing the 0.5 increments, that's just extravagant. That's a 20-point scale. Oh, but don't even get me started on the 0.1s. I remember way back when I was an avid reader of IGN, they switched to that scale. They argued that it was just that important to distinguish between an 8.2 and an 8.3. But I most certainly did not agree. And I still don't agree that anyone needs that many points. I mean, I can sort of understand this as a response to the previous problem I stated. If you've effectively only got 3 points to work with when talking about a game people might enjoy between 7 and 10, then yeah, you probably want some more wiggle room. But that's a bit of a silly solution to what was already a silly problem. Using 0.1 increments means that you are using a 100-point scale. You are scoring a game out of 100. And when you look at it that way, does it really seem like it's that important to decide between 82 and 83? I spent many a year chewing on these thoughts, being the highly opinionated individual that I am. So when the time came to make my own reviews, I wanted to do things differently. I decided on a 7-point system to address both of those big issues I'd had with other scoring systems. I hoped that by using a number other than 10, I would sort of disarm people into being okay with me using the whole scale. I hoped that using a unique number would help them frame things differently, rather than focusing so hard on how many points a game gets out of 10 specifically, which can be equated to a percentage. I've helped this idea along by always showing where a score lands on the scale. Instead of just seeing the number, people see how far along the line it is, as well as which little Arlo best represents my experience. My goal has been to draw people as far away from the strict metrics established by the rest of the industry as possible. And on top of that, I just plain don't need more than 7. I know it's literally only 10% of what some publications use, but I think even 10 is too much. Frankly, I could have done 5, but 7 has always felt just about right to me. 3 on one end, 3 on the other, 1 right in the middle. I see the numbers as follows. 1. A terrible game, almost 0 redeeming qualities, maybe even straight up broken. I have never given a game a 1. 2. A bad game. Some little hints of quality and technically playable, but overall a very unpleasant experience. I don't know if I hate any other Nintendo game like I hate Star Fox Zero, but I could see that it was sort of almost onto something underneath all the unpleasantness, so I gave it a 2. 3. Much more playable, easier to see that there's a decent game under there, but the bad still outweighs the good. 4. As a value, it's technically above half, but I always try to call attention to the idea that it's on the middle of the scale visually. A 4 is just about equal parts bad and good. A game with a lot going for it, but also a lot dragging it down. 5. A decent game. It's either got some pretty big problems, or it's just not that exciting, but still a good time. 6. A straight up good game. Maybe some disappointing problems, but still absolutely worth playing. And finally, 7. A really terrific game. Either few to no problems, or its good stuff is so good that its problems can't bring it down too much at the end of the day. Top recommendation. Notice how even at the top and bottom of my scale, I try to stay away from absolutes. You could probably argue that plenty of cash grab, mobile, and or asset flip games out there do indeed have zero redeeming qualities and thus fully deserve the lowest score possible, but I've never reviewed any of those, so if I ever give something a 1, it might still have at least some small redeeming qualities. And I've given 7s to plenty of games that had problems because I loved the experiences that much, and because the idea that the top of the scale is reserved for perfection is silly to me. Maybe that can be true on a 100-point scale, but even then, how many games out there are actually, truly perfect? Looking for literal perfection is just... why? These scores are supposed to represent how much a person enjoyed a game, but when you focus so hard on how close it comes to that mythical perfect 10, you lose sight of why people write reviews in the first place. I've always been pretty happy with my 7-point system, though I was really surprised by how confusing some people found it, especially early on. I've had some people claim that it's indecipherable nonsense because they're so used to the 10, 20, 100-point system. A 7? How are we supposed to know what that means? This was so strange to me. I mean, 1, like I said, I always show my scores visually on the scale, and they're always accompanied by these little Arlos to better illustrate what each number means. But even if I didn't do that, I feel like it's not too hard to figure out at least vaguely how much of 7 any given number is. You don't need a specific percentage, you just need to see the total scale and where a number fits on it. A 2 out of 7? Arlo really didn't like that game. 4 out of 7? I guess he thought it was okay. 7 out of 7? He must have loved it. I mean, even if I used a 418-point scale, it should still be easy to see approximately where 374 lies on it and get at least an idea of how much I liked a game. It's not supposed to be an exact science, it's just supposed to give you an idea. That's my thinking, at least. And that, my friends, is why for the last 5 years, I've been using a 7-point scoring system. And I'm getting rid of my scoring system. That was annoying. But that's right, and I'm not just ditching my own 7-point system. Effective immediately, I will no longer give my review scores at all. The reasons are numerous, so let's get to it. I would say the seed of this idea was sown by my review of the Link's Awakening remake. The idea of what makes a good remake is so subjective. I had a problem with how the game was super duper accurate to the point where it missed a chance to expand on a great experience and make it even better. I also didn't like the art style they chose for the game. But I knew many people would argue that its accuracy made it a perfect remake, and that it wasn't fair to score a game lower for its art style when it does look very pleasant for the most part. It's a good-looking game, you can't really argue that. So in the end, I decided to just not give the game a score at all. I didn't want to start a bunch of arguments or for people to hang on to whatever number I gave them, telling me it was too low, because it's not fair to judge a remake the way I did. Arlo gave it a blank because he wanted a reimagining, not a remake, and that's not the game's fault. You know, that kind of thing. So I skipped it. And guess what? It worked out pretty well. Plenty of people still hated the review, but I had at least avoided all the talk of unfair scores. At the time of this recording, as you saw earlier, we are currently working on my Origami King review, and I spent a good while laboring over what score to give the game. I have a lot of issues with it, namely the ring puzzle system. I knew that if I gave the game too low a score, some people would hyper-focus on that score and search my review for reasons it wasn't justified. This is just what some people do. I see it all the time in reviews from all over, and I knew that that would lead many commenters to one specific conclusion. Arlo gave the game a low score because he isn't good at ring puzzles. I'm literally 100% certain that would happen. They would say it's not fair to judge a game poorly just because you're bad at it, ignoring the wealth of other issues I have with the game. I don't know if that sounds too pessimistic or complainy or something, but trust me, this is something I've had to deal with for 5 years. People focus on scores to a ridiculous degree, and they use those scores as the basis for all their arguments for why a review is bad. So at some point I was just like, you know what? I won't give this game a score either. I'll skip it. It's my channel, I'll do what I please. But then I asked myself what the official reasoning would be. With Link's Awakening, it was because of the whole remake concept complicating things. But what was my official excuse with Origami King? What reason would I give? What was the actual reason? And that was when I realized why I didn't want to give the game a score. It was because I didn't want to give the game a score. I started to realize that I didn't like scoring games. Really, I've never liked scoring games. It's always been the worst part of the writing process. It's always caused me the most anxiety. It's never done anything but start arguments and give me a headache. One of the reasons the idea of scoring a game causes so many headaches throughout the industry is that too many people take it as more than just a measurement of a specific reviewer's enjoyment. They take it as a credit given to a game as an award for its quality, and if they think the award is greater or lesser than the game deserves, they take it personally. This society already has a problem allowing different opinions and not seeing them as personal attacks on all other opinions, which we've talked about plenty on this channel. So when some people form their own opinions on a game, they start to see different opinions as unfair, especially more critical ones. They believe that a game objectively deserves some score or another, and that anything below that is some sort of attack. The reviewers giving lower scores must be wrong. Like I said, they'll hunt through the review for ways to delegitimize the lower score. As though a game can truly deserve anything. As though a score is supposed to be an objective measure, and whenever there's a clear majority opinion, any outliers are simply incorrect. I have nothing against the people who run Metacritic themselves, and it's not a bad idea for a site in general, but I have to admit that it's done a lot to further damage and skew the idea of what a review score is supposed to be. It's given people something of a final score for every game that releases, and when they don't agree with the score, it causes problems. When Breath of the Wild came out, Jim Sterling gave it a 7 out of 10. He hated the weapon durability system and just didn't think the game was that great. Perfectly reasonable opinion, and 7 is still a pretty high score. But Zelda fans attacked him for it. His score compromised the game's overall score on Metacritic, so they took it personally. They saw that very reasonable opinion as a full-on assault against the series they loved. But here's the thing. If he had hated the game's guts, but not given it any score at all, the backlash would have been microscopic compared to what he got. In fact, because of that incident, he stopped doing official scored reviews altogether and now just does impressions videos, some of which are still basically reviews. He just doesn't give them scores now. And guess what? Nothing like the Zelda incident has happened since. A game is not a person. It does not deserve anything. Despite what some people would have you believe, a Metacritic score does not matter. It's not supposed to be a big competition. A game losing a point because of a more critical than average review does not hurt anyone. Apart from developers who get bonuses based on Metacritic scores, but that has nothing to do with reviews and everything to do with abusive publishers who underpay their developers. Anyway, Despite it just being a number, it's like the sheer existence of that number just naturally leads to this kind of mindset, where every review needs to be fair, and if a score is below the average, it's wrong. We see the results of this mindset everywhere. Some major publications will criticize a game up and down, then still give it a high score, because they don't want to make the publisher mad, because both they and the publisher know that people care an awful lot about scores. And when a publication like IGN reviews a game, it's really one specific person reviewing a game, so it shouldn't matter at all what they say, but people don't see that. They see IGN reviewing the game, and if a massive publication like IGN is reviewing a game, that review needs to match the majority opinion or something is very wrong. I mean, look at their infamous review of Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The reviewer gave the game a 7.8 out of 10. That's a pretty darn good score. In addition to other complaints, one was that too much of the game takes place on water, which has a real mechanical impact on the gameplay, as you'll know if you've played Pokemon before. And people didn't look at their other valid critical points. Their takeaway from the review was, IGN gave Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire a 7.8 because it had too much water. And that incident went down in history and still remains today an example of how dumb and unreasonable game journalists are. Even though, in reality, it's an example of how skewed our perception of scores is. How 7.8 is seen as so unfairly low that we must find a reason to say it's not legitimate, even if it's a very silly one. Do you think any of that would have happened if people didn't have that number to cling on to and measure against the majority opinion? Because I'm sure it wouldn't have. People just care too much about scores. It's the content of the review that matters. It's the actual opinions. The point of a review isn't to award a game based on its deeds, but simply to communicate how any one specific person felt about it. That's it. That's the end. I could go on and on about the concept, but I'll stop short and just say that's basically why I'm not going to score games anymore. Having scores hasn't helped me in any way. All it's done is give people a better chance to argue. Scores turn what should be one little guy's opinion into a personal attack in way too many cases. Plus, scores really complicate things in this age of post-game patches and DLC. Sometimes a game will change dramatically after launch, meaning a review is no longer completely accurate. If you ask me, this is not the reviewer's problem. If you want good reviews, make your game good at launch. It's just, sorry, it's just kind of the way the business works. Video reviews especially can't just be updated. But in cases like these, I always get people asking me if I'll change my review. Thing is, they only ever focus on the score. They ask if the score will change specifically because that is seen as the ultimate measure of quality. That's the part of the review that has to be fair. Just another reason to distance myself from scores entirely. It's just too much of a headache. And even on a more personal level, it's just not a fun process. Perfectly wording my opinions is what I should worry about when I'm writing a review, but laboring over whether I should give a game a 5 or a 6? That's no fun at all, and in the end, it doesn't even mean anything. I've done a fair amount of reviews now, and anytime I've ever had a regret about a review, it's been score related. Oh, maybe I scored that game a 4 because I was kinda mad. Maybe it deserved a 5. Aw man, was that game really good enough to give a 7? Maybe that one problem was bad enough to just barely edge it down to 6. Even though none of that matters. My opinions on these games haven't changed. If anyone wants to know what I think about a game, watching the review will tell them exactly. The score at the end just doesn't do anything that the review doesn't already do, and much, much better at that. And whenever I start to doubt my decision, I look back on comment sections for all sorts of reviews I've read over the years across many sites. It's funny because even though I've cited super defensive Metacritic warriors as a reason to ditch scores, when I'm looking back, it's actually more subtle examples that really drive home that I'm making the right decision. It's all the times I've seen comments that are very civil, don't get me wrong, being like, "You only gave the game an 8? This review reads like an 8.5. I can't believe you gave this game a 7. I would give it a 7.6 at least." Even when people aren't caring about the Metacritic, they still care so much that the score is fair. They'll still skip the opportunity to disagree on individual points and instead simply go after that number. And even if they haven't formed an opinion of the game themselves, they've never played it, they're not gonna play it, and they don't even really care about it that much, they'll still do their best to gauge whether or not the number matches the words and call the reviewer out if they don't think it does. Remembering that, that's when I know for sure that score ain't helping anybody. Review scores is just dumb. Now, I will admit that to some, dropping review scores might seem like a journalistic self-destruct. Lots of people like to skip down to the review score without even reading a review, and at the end of the day, those clicks still equal money. If I stop scoring games, will I lose some of my viewership? People who just skipped right to the end? Well, I really don't think it'll make that big of a difference. I'm pretty sure most people watching my reviews are actually watching my reviews. Deviating from the 10-point system and thus excluding myself from Metacritic was probably already enough to discourage skippers. And having no score in my Link's Awakening review didn't end up being a problem. It's technically possible that it will be a problem if people start to notice scores are gone forever, but this ain't a website where a click is a click and an ad impression is an ad impression. YouTube cares about watch time more than anything, so people who dip in, look at the score, and bail are probably doing more harm than good anyway. The algorithm does not like abandonment. Nope, I am confident in my decision. And on top of everything else, you know why ditching review scores is a really great idea? I won't have to animate the little score thing anymore. I mean, I had to paste in the clip, change the game logo, move the circle animation, render it separately, bring it back in. It was a whole thing. Took at least 5 minutes, sometimes even 10 if I made a mistake. What a pain. So there you have it. Is this a foolish decision? Is this the best decision I've ever made? Will you miss my scores, or are you happy to see them gone? Will this new era of my channel get cut short when I'm shut down by AOL, which is what happened to Joystick after they got rid of scores? Man, that was bogus. I love Joystick. Stupid AOL. They don't even send me those discs anymore. Maybe they hate me. Anyway, let me know down in the comments. And for old time's sake, let's do one more score. I give you, my wonderful friend, a 7 out of 7.